So just a heads up, I did also do a review for this on Brad Jones's channel, Stone Gremlin Productions. You can check that out there. That's more of a conversational. I can talk. That's more having a conversation. But I just wanted to do a review, just sort of giving my own initial thoughts. Just a little shorter, tighter. If you just want to know fast what I thought of this, because it is Stephen King, and I talk about a lot of Stephen King movies, good or bad. And for those who I'm sure you know, but if you don't, this is the official sequel to The Shining. There is a book that Stephen King wrote as a sequel to his book, The Shining. And this is kind of like a sequel to the book and the movie. Very obvious, the tie-ins to the movie. They literally try to recreate a lot of the shots. And for a film that honestly I had no interest in seeing. I love The Shining. I'm not really interested in a sequel, especially one that looks like it kind of goes and does its own thing, not tying in much to The Shining. I thought it was all right. There's a lot of ups and a lot of downs. There's not much that makes it like a must-see movie, but there are a few things. The initial setup, again, without going too much into spoilers, it's years later, and Danny, the little boy, has grown up into Ewan McGregor, and he's very much struggling with, the scars of the events that happened in the first film, which I kind of like. I like that, he isn't just fixed or going on to the next thing, or the demons come back. Oh no, it isn't just that. It's very much, it seems tied into surviving something traumatic and the bad ways he copes. He starts off very much, sort of drinking his problems away, and much like his father. But then he gets help, and it's him trying to get his life back on track. And then there's another story. It's a little sillier. It's very Stephen King, but that's about these creatures that essentially eat people like Danny. Yeah, these people that have The Shining, which it's not many, but these kind of... Everyone uses the word vampire. They're vampire-esque, I guess, but it's weird using that word because, the way they do it is very strange. They look for other people that have these powers, and they either convert them or they suck their life force. Okay, yeah, I see why it's like vampires the more I think about it, but the way they do it is very odd. They sort of breathe out their... they have this steam that I guess is The Shining, which is weird. It makes me think of, Green Mile, where it's, flies and stuff like that. He has these weird... in my opinion, non-scary ways of representing these powers, but, it's, and that is a major part I'll get to, is that the movie's not really scary. I don't think it's trying to be. I categorize this more as a supernatural thriller with creepy moments, where Shining's definitely horror. It's scream here. There's scenes in this movie where the screening I saw, people were oh, there's the hallway. Oh, something bad's gonna happen. But there were no real screams. I think the biggest scream is when the light turned on in a long moment of silence, so that gives you an idea, and I think that's intentional. I don't think it's supposed to be straight up horror. It's supposed to be a supernatural thriller. And these creatures come across this girl who has these super duper powers, probably the strongest one they ever came across, and she comes across Danny. They're kind of pen pals, chalkboard pals, if you will, chalk pals. They write on this board back and forth, and when she realizes they're probably looking for her and she's trying to stop them from, killing these innocent people who have the Shining gift, she contacts Danny to try and stop them, pretty much. So that's the basic plot. And some of that, you might be wondering, well, what does that have to do with the Overlook Hotel from The Shining? You see that a lot in the trailer and everything. For the most part, nothing until the end, and when it comes up, it does feel like it's not totally out of nowhere, but it goes there and it plays the music yeah, this is what's all been building up to, and it kind of was so doing its own thing that you almost kind of forget about it. And for the most part, I wasn't really getting into that, except for one scene, which I won't give away, but it's essentially a scene where one of the characters walks into a room and has a conversation. If you see the movie, you'll know what scene I'm talking about. And in a movie where it's kind of, it's a 2.5 hour long movie. So for it to keep my attention as much as it did is pretty impressive, but I can't act like it was all super entertaining. There are some parts where I'm like, okay, we could have edited this and trimmed this, and stuff. And I was with it enough. I'm like, okay, well, I want to see what happens, but I'm not, super excited, except for this one scene where, like I said, his character goes in, has a conversation. I just woke up. I'm like, holy shit, like this... Ooh, this is a scene, like suddenly everything they were doing with the hotel and the callbacks and everything really seemed earned in this one moment. But it's just this one moment. And then there's all these other callbacks and it kind of seems fan servicey, like, oh, remember that? Well, that's back. Oh, remember those characters? Well, they're back. And they are interacting in a way that's different than the Kubrick film. I mean, these are just two very different animals, so to try and cross them over is a little weird. The best kind of comparison I can make with it is if you saw Ready Player One, there's a whole scene where they go and recreate The Shining. But it's clearly not the same feel. It's a different movie, and there it's intentional. And you could argue it's intentional here, because a lot of it is kind of the idea of like moving on and so forth. But where I think it kind of falls into a little bit of a trap is that it tries to bring the movie it's created, which is, again, a supernatural thriller, almost like a... Not a chase movie, but definitely somebody's hunting us and we gotta get away, or we gotta hunt them, or we gotta think ahead, that kind of thing. And then suddenly we're supposed to be thrown in the original Shining universe, where they try to recreate a lot of the shots and a lot of the atmosphere, but it's still clearly a different movie. Like there's action sequences and there's like, supernatural steam going out and people turning to CG skeletons, all that stuff, and that's not how that film worked. And it tries to explain a little bit, like what the hotel is and how it worked. Again, very Stephen King, but not very Kubrick. So, which... You could argue, well, that's what I want to see. I want to see something more like the Stephen King book, which, fair enough. The guy wrote the book. We wouldn't have the Kubrick movie without him. He famously was not the biggest fan of the Kubrick movie. So, it's like, this is not surprising. And even him, even though I love the movie, I love him more than the book, King not liking the movie, he makes 100% legit points. I'm not going to be like, well, what's his problem? Like, no, I get it. It's very, very different. It has sort of different themes and ideas and atmosphere, and the characters are kind of different, so I totally get it, which is why it's a little weird when they combine the two. So a part of me is thinking, man, I wish they just let the original Shining movie out of it. It didn't, do any callbacks or anything. But then, man, we would miss just this one incredible scene where this guy goes and has this conversation. And it's one of those things where when I left, I was like, yeah, it's ups and downs, but that scene, oh my God. Everything just felt like it built up to it. So, and you might see it and be like, oh, okay, well, whatever, it was cool. But for me, like, man, that was just a big, big part. I just thought it just worked on so many levels. You could read so much into it, into the characters, into the themes, into the addiction that they're talking about, the shots they got, connecting to the first film and everything. I'm just like, man, now I see why they did this, but it's only for this one scene, and it keeps going afterwards. You have to have your climax afterwards, and it didn't quite feel right to me. There's even some scenes where people were kind of snickering at some of the stuff the ghost did, particularly the last shot in the movie got some laughs, and I don't know if it was meant to, although there were funny moments in this. But on the whole, I'd say, like, the stuff that stood out to me, and not only that one scene near the end, but anything where they're kind of, and again, this isn't giving anything away, where they go inside other people's minds. Again, you've seen the first film, that's a part of it. The way they represent it and the way they try to do it in different ways. This is a Mike Flanagan movie, who I love. I love watching this dude's stuff, man. I mean, this is like a dude to watch. Like, he's really doing some cool stuff with, like, horror and psychological thrillers and horror and stuff like that. So whenever there's something about going to a person's mind or trying to locate someone, I felt it was really doing some, as far as CG goes, like, simple effects. You know, like anyone that knows CG is like, well, okay, there's different elements to move, but I mean, there's much trickier, you know, effects out there. But it really works, and it's really, really effective. So I love that stuff, and I love the conversation at the end, or near the end, I should say. Everything else is kind of like, what you think is gonna happen kind of happens, and the acting in it, all the acting is good. Personally, for me, I can't think of any acting that was great, like phenomenal. I know it's going to sound weird, but I feel like this is a movie where, especially kind of with characters like this, these Stephen King type characters, you need to go a little bit more over the top. And it's weird talking like that, because I always say pull back, but it's like, I feel like you needed like some, you know, big name character actors for this. Actually, that's right. Ewan McGregor is, you know, many respects a great character actor, a great actor in general. And he does good. Everybody does good. But I'm saying, like, you know, I want to see, like, a Paul Giamatti in this, or I want to see, like, a younger Nicolas Cage in this, you know, or a younger Harrison Ford or something. Like, someone that can kind of bring this extra level to it. Everybody feels like they're bringing just what King wrote. And that's good, because King's a good writer. And even the movie, I feel like Mike Flanagan really represents King's books probably the closest to how they're written, which has pros and cons, but I feel like this is really, really close to, man, this catches the atmosphere, this gets all the little details, this really captures like what King usually does, like the strengths of King, but I feel like in this one, it kind of stops there. You know, where it needed to be pushed a little further in order to be a movie. For the main villain in this, you know, I'm thinking like, you know, get like a Nicole Kidman in there, or you know, a Kathy Bates in there. I mean, even at her age, you could do a Catherine Zeta-Jones in there. I know Catherine Zeta-Jones. I've always talked about her before. But yeah, I feel like she could, you know, any of them could push it just that extra level kind of needed. Where what we get here is still good. Honestly, the actor that I think does best in this, there's a cameo from the kid who's from Room and Good Boys and Smurfs too, which again just shows anytime you look at an actor who doesn't do well in something, I mean, it's not always the actor, you know, or it's not always the director and stuff. I mean, sometimes it's just the situation, because this kid, just in the cameo he has alone in this movie, I'm like, this kid deserves an Oscar. Like, this is just like, I mean, he just brought this whole uncomfortable level to his scene that he's in, and it's such a short scene, but I am just like, oh my god, I am just in a terrible place watching this. Like that's the kind of more the acting I wanted from like everyone in this, you know, just kind of goes that one step beyond, just that extra level. But everyone still does good. I'd say, you know, I'm leaning more towards Ewan McGregor, honestly, because he really has to be a guy battling with this addiction, and while also doing all this other stuff. And I always believed he is really fighting, you know, trying to get his life back together, trying to stay away from, you know, this terrible liquid and everything that's always calling to him, and he has the past, you know, with his father and everything. So, but yeah, I felt like with this kind of story, that we've seen these kind of stories before, something else needed to stand out outside of it's a sequel to The Shining. And I felt like that could have been the extra element. The only other thing that I think it kind of upped it a little bit. There's one scene, and again, I don't want to give too much away, but somebody tricks somebody else early on. And it's a nice surprise. You kind of think like, you know, oh, wow, you know, you think a scene like this would come, whatever, in the last third or something like that, but it happens pretty early. And it kind of gave me hope that, oh, well, this movie is not just going to do the traditional things. But the character that gets duped a few too many times. It kind of reminded me of Batman in the Dark Knight Rises, where it's like he gets duped so often you kind of lose the intimidation of the character, to where when it gets to the third act, I'm like, I'm not even that intimidated anymore. anymore. So again, the whole film kind of has these pros and cons. In terms of would I recommend it, I would say if you're looking for that grand sequel to The Shining, that's like just as vague and just as big and just as epic, I feel like most people know it's not going to quite be that. I think people know it's going to have callbacks, but it's not going to quite be that big movie, especially because, again, I hate talking like this, but because King is more involved in it, he's going to bring it back to his style, and King and Kubrick are very different styles. They just are. But the thing with Kubrick is that you can watch that movie, the original Shining, and you can read all sorts of different things into it. There's a whole film about reading the different interpretations in there, and that's part of the fun. Or you can just watch it as a horror film. That's what I like about it. You can see it either way. Where this one is, the comparison we made a lot, me and Brad, was 2010, the sequel to 2001. That's not a bad movie. It's also a Kubrick sequel, the more I think about it. It's not a bad movie, but it's trying to answer these questions that, where not knowing the answers was part of the fun of the original, that vagueness really opened up, just this grand experience. And then they're trying to answer, questions we didn't necessarily want the answers to. And it takes away a little bit from the original experience, but again, they're different movies. You can still watch the original on either of these and get whatever you get out of it. Just because they made a sequel doesn't mean... If you hate Last Jedi, you can still love Star Wars. It doesn't ruin Star Wars. It's the same kind of thing where you can watch and still get those same reactions and feelings. But it's not a bad movie either. 2010 is not a bad film. It's a different kind of film, and there are some callbacks, and they're very loving callbacks, and it's not, without intelligence, in terms of trying to answer these questions. They're just, for me anyway, they're not questions that I wanted answered. So, excuse me. But if you're a King fan and you love the original book, this has a lot more of that. And I haven't read the book Dr. Sleep, but I think if you're going off of, is this going to be a grand, scary sequel to The Shining, I'd say probably no, it's not that. But it's a totally okay Stephen King thriller. That happens to be tied to The Shining, and at times not in a bad way. So I think if you're just looking for, it just something that has a supernatural lean to it and has creepiness to it, and it's a little bit of a chase at times, and it's about people trying to get their lives back together, but there's definitely, monsters that suck people's souls and stuff like that. I think you'll like it fine. The last thing I'll say about it real fast is that, because they don't really show in the trailer, it's like, well, do they CG Shelley Duvall in there? Do they CG, Jack Nicholson or the little boy and all that stuff? I have a theory that maybe they were going to, because the actors they got to play them and act like them are eerily close, but it looks like they clearly didn't. It's actors that just move like them and look similar to them, but not like exactly. But you can easily see someone like CGing, Shelley Duvall's face on there in some sort of effect. And they don't do that. I'm really glad they didn't. Because I feel like that would have been... It would have been just a little too distracting. Even if they did it great, I feel like we would have instead not been focusing on the emotion of the moment, and we instead would have been looking at how good the effect is. And there's some scenes in this where it's like you just don't want that in there. You don't want that distraction. And I'm really glad they didn't go that route. I'm glad if they're gonna do this, they went and got actors that, act very much like them and sound very much like them, but, it's not them. They didn't do any effects with it, and I think that was a very smart move. So... yeah, take that for what it's worth. I think it's an okay movie. Like I said, I think most people know going in it's not going to be this grand masterpiece sequel to The Shining, but I feel like it's not necessarily marketed that way. Like, they show the clips, but they also show that the monsters sucking up people's souls through smoke and stuff like that. And people know that's not The Shining. They know that's not how, or the Kubrick version anyway, that's not how it worked. So I feel like people, the one thing they might be let down by is that it's not a scary movie. And again, I don't think it's meant to be. I think it's meant to be more of a suspense and a thriller and a dive into, this person's struggle. Which King does very well, and Mike Flanagan does fantastic. And I think that does it pretty well here, even sometimes surprisingly tying into the original film. Like, sometimes it really worked. So, yeah, if you're just looking for a supernatural thriller, I think this is fine. I think it's an okay film to check out. I think it has one or two moments that are just like, oh, that's great. And everything else is a decent middle of the road, I think. But for a movie I had no interest in seeing, the only reason I wanted to see it is because it was directed by Mike Flanagan. I think that's saying something, because I was really ready to go in and just be like, I don't know, a sequel to The Shining, what? You're trying to recreate the shots, what? But it was all right. I thought this was a totally serviceable film. So I have no idea what people are thinking about this yet. I'm not sure this video is going to come out Thursday or Friday. so if you have, there's early screenings. That's right. They had like an early preview for it. So if you have seen it, let me know what you think. Were you let down that there wasn't as much, like a scary big connection to The Shining, or do you feel it tied in beautifully to it? Because for me, I'm kind of half and half on it. So that's about it. I'll see you next time. Take care.